Hello everyone, Rich Hagon here with Hall of Famer Mr. Randy Buehler, and Randy, drafts in the books for day one, so now we get to put away 40 cards and move into the world of 60, or indeed 75. So, M15 comes along, standard, a format that people have been playing a bunch over the last weeks and months, relatively well known. Tell us what's going on in the world of standard.
Well, first I want to make sure, just real quick, that everybody understands what we're talking about when we talk about standard constructed.
Right.
So standard constructed, you can play with any card that has been published in the last 2 years. So that'll ebb and flow. It rotates every fall. So when the fall set comes out, a year's worth of cards rotate out. That means here we are in the late summer. This is as big as standard ever gets. Right. Standard right now is 8 sets. So you've got the entire Return of Ravnica block, you've got the entire Theros block, and you've got 2 different core sets, M14 and M15. It's a big, those are the cards these people get to build their decks from, so pick whatever you like. There are a bunch of strategies, and there you go. That's kind of how standard works.
All right, are there clear-cut favorite decks coming into the weekend?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it being as big, people have had time to work this out. I've got it at 5 tier 1 archetypes. I mean, a lot of people will tell you there's the Trinity. There's sort of 3 decks that have been winning a lot of standard events. If you look at the Grand Prix circuit, if you look at what's winning on a week-by-week basis. The Boogeyman, though, the best deck, clearly the deck that everybody knows is going to be here, that everybody knows is going to be good, is the Black Devotion deck. So this is Thoughtseizes and Pack Rats. I think those are probably the 2 most hated cards in standard right now because they're probably the 2 most powerful cards in the best deck.
Sure.
Or at least the deck that's put up the most wins lately. The thing what you want to do with a Black Devotion deck is you've got some disruption elements. You've got the ability to take cards out of their hand with Thoughtseize and even Lifebane Zombie. You've got the ability to destroy their creatures with Hero's Downfall and any number of other black removal spells. And then you get card advantage from Underworld Connections. So you can just be paying life to draw extra cards. And then if I'm trading cards, but I'm drawing some extras, I'm going to get ahead. I'm going to build up a board full of permanents. And that's when something like Grey Merchant of Asphodel can just come down and drain a bunch of life.
Okay, now underneath that, you've listed common variants, splash, 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 so we can go different ways.
Yeah, I mean, the mana is pretty good in standard right now. Between the Scry lands, those temples, and the Return to Ravnica lands, you can get 8 sources of another color and still have all your lands tapped for black mana. So people are looking at things like Abrupt Decay is really nice because it can blow up a Detention Sphere. Red is really nice because you can slaughter games away as Sphinx's Revelation. Esper is really the control deck is the target with those splashes. But then the thing that happens the most often is actually the white splash, where you say, all right, I'm playing Black Devotion. What's the thing I'm most worried about? It's the other Black Devotion players.
Okay.
Because they have also figured out that we're playing the best deck. So if you take this shell and you say, what do I want in the mirror? Well, there's so much removal. Grey Merchant doesn't do that much. What you really want is protection. Protection from black in the form of Blood Baron of Vizkopa that's the trump in the mirror match. So maybe you go to white and you say, I'm going to be really good against the mirror.
Okay, so Black Devotion, the #1.
Definitely.
Devotion is going to crop up in our next deck.
Yeah, the blue Devotion deck, it burst onto the scenes at Pro Tour Theros, which is the last standard Pro Tour, and it's basically the same deck. There haven't been a lot of new cards that have helped it out, but it has just stayed on top of standard ever since Desani won in Dublin. So you play blue permanents, Tidebinder Mage kind of looks a little dorky. It's really good if your opponent's playing red or green, but you know what? He's got 2 blue mana symbols in his mana cost. So does Frostburn Weird. Nightveil Spectre gives you 3, and that means your Thassa's turn active. That means your Masters of Waves spill out 1,000,000 creatures. It's a really good, solid strategy, and it has been successful all year long.
In terms of variants, you've only got 1 listed there, and it's white for Detention Sphere. Why is Detention Sphere such a big add to the mono blue deck?
Well, it's just the ability to deal with whatever that one thing is that your opponent does, whether it's clearing a giant blocker out of the way, out of the red-green deck, or whether it's getting rid of the Underworld Connections so that the mono-black deck doesn't spin its way ahead of you. Getting rid of an enemy Planeswalker can be really powerful. I mean, the deck it doesn't really interact with the opponent. Like, the biggest drawback to the strategy as a mono blue deck is that you don't really get to mess with your opponent's stuff. You just kind of do your thing and hope that it's good enough. Detention Sphere gives you the ability to interact with your opponent.
Okay, so Black Devotion, Blue Devotion, with some variants. I think you've already mentioned a card, one of my favorites in standard, Sphinx's Revelation, and that, of course, goes in blue-white control.
Definitely. Yeah, the blue-white controlled deck can be taken in a number of different directions, but all of them share that blue-white core. It's Detention Sphere, Supreme Verdict, Sphinx's Revelation, and then Elspeth is really the top end in a lot of these decks. I mean, you can run it without Elspeth, you can run it without Detention Sphere. You're always going to have Supreme Verdict to sweep away the opponent's creatures. You're always going to have Sphinx's Revelation to sort of fill your hand up after you've traded cards for a while. I mean, this is an old school control deck. This strategy has been good since Mike LeConte won Pro Tour 1 with blue-white control. Right? It's essentially the same Uber archetype that's been played since the dawn of time.
The Pro Tour historically is meant to be made up of players who like to play control because they like more turns to outthink and outfight and outdraw, and just the more Magic I play, the more chances I have to be better than you.
Precisely correct.
So is this a good choice this weekend, do you think?
It is a good choice. The thing about really winning with control is you have to accurately predict the metagame. Because, I mean, sure, you get a lot of decisions once you're here. That's great. But you also have a bunch of decisions at the deck building stage. It's like, am I more worried about killing a horde of small creatures? Or am I more worried about killing, a couple of really large creatures? If it's a couple of really large creatures, well, maybe I want to go to the Black Splash. And I want to have, maybe I even go to Hero's Downfall. Maybe I'm just, a couple other removal spells. So getting the deck list correct is step one if you're going to go down that path. If you have a good read on the metagame and you can sort of tune your control deck to have all the right details, then it's a great call. But are you sure you know the metagame?
Right.
So it is a little bit of a gamble. And it's probably, I mean, in terms of winning percentage on a week-to-week basis, it feels like it's been second or third-ish.
One of the arguments in blue-white control in the last few months has been one Aetherling, or is that infinitely too many creatures to be playing? 1 or 0. That is not a problem with our next deck. We're going to talk about red-green monsters.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the strategy here is also kind of classic. Mana creatures to accelerate giant baddies. Just the large creatures, whether it's Pelucranos, whether it's Stormbreath Dragon. This is Timmy magic, right? And it's pretty good. Like, the card quality up and down the list is strong. Elvish Mystic is nice, Carrington is nice. Courser of Krufix is, I think, the card that really pushed this over the top. You didn't see these decks having a ton of success back when the last time the Pro Tour was in Standard at Pro Tour Theros. But Courser's been printed since then, and it gives the deck a little more staying power, right? It's a little better at blocking against the Weenie Swarms. It gets a little bit of life, but really gets that card advantage to make sure that you actually have enough mana to cast your Stormbreath Dragon. And some of the interactions with the various Planeswalkers you can play are also quite powerful.
Okay, so that's deck number 4, and that brings us to deck 5, A, B, and possibly C.
Yeah, I might be cheating a little bit here by calling red Aggro 1 archetype. I mean, it's more of a spectrum of decks ranging from sort of, Boss Sly, 36 creature swarm, over to the Boros Burn deck, which might only have 8 creatures in it, and is mostly burn spells. Often they'll touch white, although the most aggro of the swarms won't. But I see that as a spectrum of decks. And honestly, if you divided it up, none of them would deserve to be called Tier 1. So I figured lump them all together. There's a red aggro deck here. This is actually, of the 5, I think this might be the one that gets the most from M15. So I do think we're going to see some of this weekend for sure.
Okay. There is often at a Pro Tour a deck that the pros decide they're not going to lose to. And historically that might be a dredge deck, or it might be an affinity deck, or it might be some particular combo deck. Is there a deck in Standard, talking with people over the last 48 hours, that you think people are gunning for? What's the deck with the target on it this time around? Yeah,
the deck with the target is the Black Devotion deck, but it's really hard to gun for it because they play Thoughtseize. Like, whatever your clever plan is for trumping what they're up to, they can Thoughtseize it out of your hand on the first turn, so it's a really tricky target to have. And I mean, a lot of them will say, well, I can't beat him, I'll just join him. I think you'll see plenty of Black Devotion decks. And part of it is that Thoughtseize, just whatever the opponent is up to, you get to mess with it.
Okay, so those are 5 big archetypes.
And that's really the archetypes coming in. I mean, the way we've set this up is that this is the state of Standard as of a couple of weeks ago. M15 has just come out.
So what does M15 do for Standard?
Well, we're going to find out.
Yeah.
This is now, we're moved into the more speculative portion of the piece.
Let's have some ideas.
I'm certainly rooting for somebody to just break the format wide open. I definitely think that there's a green devotion deck that you can build with Nissa, with Genesis Hydra. You play Nykthos in that deck, of course, to just generate, crazy amounts of mana, maybe you're even Genesis Waving. Like, there's a deck there. I don't know if it's good enough to make it, but we'll find out. Then you've got cards like, there's so many toys in M15. Something like a Necromancer Stockpile, right? You could totally see that come up. It's the kind of card like Conley Woods would brew something around, right? Soldiers and Slivers are two more sort of aggro decks that, I'm sure people have tested those decks. I don't know if they're good enough to make the cut. I'm rooting for them. We'll see. It may be also that, keep these cards in mind. Even if, the Soldier deck isn't good enough to make the cut this weekend, when we rotate in the fall, then suddenly there's just less of the competition, right? The blue-white control deck goes away, half the black devotion deck goes away. We'll see what happens. Scuttling Doom Engine is another one that's just a toy that could go in all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's quite an explosive toy, to be fair, as well.
That's particularly good at dealing with an Elspeth. Like, worst case scenario, you trade for the Elspeth.
All right, so that's some of the new toys. What about cards from Magic 2015 that are going to slot right in to some of the big archetypes?
Yeah, I think that the most likely scenario this weekend is that we're going to see better tuned versions of the big 5 decks. Sign in Blood might be the M15 card that shows up the most in the top 8. I mean, that would be sort of, the mono black deck is going to play Sign in Blood. Hopefully somebody breaks the format wide open, but at a minimum, you're going to see things like Sign in Blood sneaking in there. On the left of the screen, you see the Gobble Rabble Master and Stoke the Flames. Those go straight into a red aggro deck. I think that, and they play well together, right? The Rabble Master's making the tokens, so you can convoke out the Stoke the Flames. Stoke the Flames is really good. Rabble Master, if you leave it unchecked, it just deals a ton of damage. And then you talked about, how can you target the Black Devotion deck? One card that, I've only heard a couple of people talking about this, but I don't know what the Black Devotion deck does against a Hornet Queen. Like, you make 5 flying Death Touch creatures, and they're trying to attack you with, like, 1 Desecration Demon. It just seems like the red-green monsters deck, if it can get to 7, Hornet Queen might just be the best, certainly the best 7+ drop. It's in contention for the best 6+ drops in Standard right now.
All right, well, 5 big decks coming in, lots of toys to play with in Magic 2015, lots of upgrades, lots for you to play at your forthcoming Friday Night Magic. By the end of this weekend, we'll have a much clearer idea of the new Standard. Thanks to Randy, and we're going to head away from these very comfy chairs.